So this is a larger sort of presentation that I have around adaptive designs in general. Our topic today is a little bit more specific to adaptive designs in phase two, or more importantly, phase three settings. Yeah. So what we will do is that we will have a quick understanding of what are adaptive designs first, and then once we do that, we can then move to a little bit more. Maybe I'll have a little bit of background in terms of how we look at adaptive designs in maybe phase one and early phase two settings. We won't spend too much time on that, but then we'll focus all our time and energy on the late phase in phase two and phase three, what kind of adaptive designs we use there. Is that okay? Good. So with that, what I want to do is maybe start with, the first question that I have. First of all, there's an acknowledgement is that I really want to thank Anshuman and Jagannath, who really helped us a lot to put some of these slides together, right? And then, of course, a standard disclaimer that everything that I say in this presentation are my opinion of the individual here, and does not in any way reflect on the on the company that I'm employed with or affiliated with. Yeah. So good. So let's start with what are adaptive designs. Yeah. Okay. So both of you are kind of right. Yeah. What I wanted to mention is that adaptive designs, okay, to go with what Dipti was saying, is defined as this. Okay. It is, and if you take the FDA guidance or the EMEA reflection paper, right, it is a study that includes a prospectively planned opportunity. Okay, so pay attention to the words which are highlighted in red, right? So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that you can actually take a look at what is coming out from the results and then go ahead and make a change unless you have planned for it upfront, a priori. So you have to have prospectively planned it, and you can modify one or more aspects of the study design, but you have to specify which aspects you're going to modify. Yeah. And the third part, which is not highlighted, is so this, and the third part, as I was saying, is based on interim analysis of data. Okay, so three aspects. One is it has to be planned upfront. Second is it can be more than one aspect. So as Rajeshwari mentioned, it's not just about the enrollment probabilities, but also about other aspects. But the third is based on interim analysis, as Dipti was saying. Okay, but the thing that you guys got mixed is that it has to be planned upfront. Okay, so what does that mean? What are the different types of things that you can adapt? So you can either adapt, for example, say I will do an interim analysis. So I will analyze the data in the middle of the study. Yeah, I may stop the study early, either for safety or for futility or for efficacy and so on. Yeah. And third is that I may change my sample size re-estimation. Yeah. The second one is ongoing, where you're actually the adaptation happens while the study is ongoing. For example, you may change the inclusion exclusion criteria. You may choose to add or delete a particular dose or dosing regimen. You may change the treatment duration. You may change the randomization ratio. All of these are ongoing ad hoc ones. And the third one is retrospective, which almost means that after the whole study is done, okay, before you actually unblind and look at the data, you may decide to change. Let's say, for example, you may change the study endpoint, or you may change from either superiority to non-inferiority or the other way around. Yeah. Now, why would you want to change the study endpoint at the end? Can anybody think of a reason why you have designed the whole study thinking of one endpoint, but then suddenly you decide before your analysis to change the study endpoint? Why would that happen?
Study endpoint, are you referring to the outcome measure or at the time which we are planned to end the study?
The outcome measure.
So I'm not sure on this.
Yeah, sure. So there could be two reasons, and one of them, you brought up a great point, it could also be the time, right? So you may initially say that I want to look at 24 weeks, and then you say, actually, you know what, I don't want to look at 24 weeks again, I want to look at 48 weeks. Yeah. But typically that would be much more in the treatment duration standpoint, right? Not just a study endpoint. The study endpoint you could switch for possibly two reasons. Okay, the first is, let us say that, let us say you were going against a drug, A, which is in the market, and your drug B. Okay, and now drug A has shown that is better than placebo because of a particular endpoint. Let's take one of the studies I worked on, okay, which was for chronic myeloid leukemia. Okay, the first drug, that got approval for chronic myeloid leukemia was a drug called Gleevec, in 1995. Okay, and it showed that it was better than whatever the standard of care was at that time, based on what they call a complete hematologic response. Okay, which meant that your blood was completely free of any blasts and so on and so forth. Okay, now what happened is later on, it turned out that Gleevec was so good that you could not beat Gleevec by looking only at CHR. Okay, the next new drug that came up. Okay, so they went ahead and said, you know what, the hematology response is one thing, but what if we were to change it at a molecular level? Okay, so that you're not just talking about a symptomatic, betterment of the disease, but actually a cure. So they used a different endpoint called, let's say, cytogenetic response or a molecular response. Okay. Now let us say a third company, drug C, has started the study thinking about CHR. Okay, because it wants to go against Gleevec, right? So it wants to use the same endpoint. But at that point, by the time drug company that makes drug C is ready to analyze the data, already the company that makes drug B has changed the endpoint, right? And now they have shown that they are better than Gleevec on, let's say, cytogenetic response or molecular response. Correct? So now, can company C still go and look only at CHR? They cannot, right? Because now the health authority has said, I have a better endpoint. And the better endpoint is, let's say, molecular response or cytogenetic response. Correct? So now company C now has to say, hey, tough luck, I'm going to have to change the study endpoint just before I analyze all the data. Okay, that could be one reason. The other reason could be that within your own study itself, let us say that you were looking, it happened to me in one study where what happened was that you were looking at patients, and one of your endpoint was that you wanted to reduce the number of seizures from baseline. Okay. Now it so happened that when we were ready to analyze the data, we found out that among the people that we had enrolled into the study, almost a third of them did not have seizures at baseline at all. So they had zero. Now, how can you show reduction from zero? You can't have negative seizures, right? So how do you show reduction from zero? You cannot. So at that point, you have to change the study endpoint again. Yeah. So these are some examples of what has happened within the study where, suddenly now you're forced to change your study endpoint. Doesn't happen very often, but it could happen once in a while. Does that make sense? Yeah, good. So these are the different types of adaptations that we can do. Okay, some of these have a statistical component to it, some of these don't. Okay, for example, inclusion exclusion criteria does not impact the statistics so much. Yeah, but interim analyses, stopping the trial early, sample size re-estimation, all of them have a lot of statistical challenges, and that's what we look at. Okay, now we have now seen what is an adaptive design. Okay, but what is not an adaptive design? That's also important. Okay, so what is not? The first one, of course, is common sense. You can't have a bad study design, bad planning, and say I'm going to adapt now because my planning was bad. Okay, so that should not be how you use adaptive designs. Okay, so it has to be well thought through upfront. Okay, but they also say that these two parts, which are very important, if you find something at the interim analysis, but you did not plan to look for it, but you just happened to find it, then you cannot change the design and call it an adaptive design. Okay, because remember what the definition of an adaptive design is, that it has to be pre-planned. Okay, the second one is revision based on information from an external source. So it's not part of the study, but something that happened. So my first example that I gave you, right, where another company had now filed using a different endpoint. That did not happen within the study. That happened in a different study. It was an external source, right? So now if I change my endpoint, that is not considered to be an adaptive design. Okay, because that information did not come from within the study. Okay, so for an adaptive design, you have to plan upfront. It has to be based on data you find within the study, and then there are different aspects that you can adapt. Okay, clear? Everybody understands now what is an adaptive design and what is not an adaptive design? Good. Okay. So now, obviously, while we're going to talk a lot about adaptive design, there are a few concerns. Okay. We will look at these at the end, right? And we'll come back and say, hey, let's look at what were some of the concerns. But right now, let's try and see how can we use some of these adaptive designs. Okay. So as I said, while we're going to focus on phase 2 and 3, I just want to maybe spend a little bit of time on what are some of the designs in the exploratory phase. Okay. For all of you who are not part of the clinical research group yet, okay, this is a quick snapshot of how clinical research typically happens. Okay, so all the way in the left over here we have the preclinical research. Okay, this is on animals, this is on in the lab, all of that stuff. Okay, so we are not we're not involved with this part. Okay, we start from this part, which is clinical phase 1, where we primarily look for safety and for pharmacokinetics. What are pharmacokinetics? It is how does the body react to the drug? Okay, that is pharmacokinetics. Okay, what does the body do to the drug? So for example, whenever you take a drug, whether it's IV or it's oral, okay, it gets absorbed into your bloodstream, right? It gets metabolized either in the liver or the stomach or the pancreas or wherever, right? Then it gets distributed to various parts of the body. And then once all of that is done, it gets excreted out. Okay, all of these are called pharmacokinetics. Yeah, so this is typically what we look at in phase 1. In phase 2, we look at some proof of concept. Does the drug actually work? Does it make the patients feel better, right? What should be the right dose? This is what we look at in phase 2. And in phase 3, we have to show that the drug is better than anything that exists in the market today, which is why the authorities should say, okay, I can go ahead and allow you to sell this drug because it is better in some way. So either it is better by because the efficacy is better, or is better because the side effects are lower. Okay, so supposing you have one drug that has a lot of bad side effects, okay, and then you have a new drug which has same efficacy, but the side effects are much lower, then the authorities can still say, okay, go ahead and sell the drug. Okay, so you have to show it's better somehow, either by efficacy or by safety. Okay, sounds good. So this is a drug development model. Okay, and the exploratory phase is typically phase 1. Okay, a little bit of phase 2 is also called exploratory, but these days what is happening is that phase 2 and phase 3 people are starting to combine together and calling them seamless phase 2-3 studies. Okay, and that's why we will look at these phase 2-3 studies here. Okay, we'll start with a little bit of phase 1. Okay, all right. So in oncology studies especially, and not just oncology, but also at CMC we were looking at a new project, a new problem statement where we were trying to find out the right serum values for snake venom and so on. Okay, all of these kinds of diseases where the mortality is very high. Okay, we try to find out what the right dose is in phase 1 itself. Okay. So normally the way that we use, the designs in phase 1 is we use this algorithmic approach called a 3+3 design. Okay. And in this 3+3 design, what happens is that you first enroll patients in a particular dose level. Okay. Oh, there is a question. Let me take a look at that. Oh, sir, what is futility? Good question. So when I talk about efficacy and futility, efficacy means if I want to stop early, either for efficacy or for futility, what that means is efficacy means, oh, the drug works so well that I can stop early. Okay, that is called stopping early for efficacy. On the other hand, it could also be that the drug works terribly badly. Yeah. Okay, and actually the drug doesn't work well at all. Then do you think it is ethically right to go ahead and put a bunch of people on a bad drug? No, right? So that is called futility, which is it is futile. The drug doesn't work, so I want to stop the study early because the drug doesn't work at all. That is called stopping early for futility. Okay, I hope that explains that helps, Ravi. Yeah. Good. So we are now here, which says that what is this 3+3 design? Okay. So what you do is that, let's say that you are at a particular dose level, let's say 5 mg. Okay. And the next dose level is 10 mg. Okay. So what you do is that you add 3 patients at the 10 mg dose level. Okay. And then you look for what these are called DLT. Okay. And DLT means dose limiting toxicity. Okay. So what does that mean? It means that that particular dose level is so toxic, okay, which means that people are getting so many side effects, adverse events, that you don't want to continue with that particular dose. Okay. So we take, and what could those kinds of side effects be? For example, it may be severe diarrhea or nausea. It may be hospitalization. It may be that your blood chemistry parameters, like your liver function tests, they're all very, very high. It may be that, you have cardiac toxicity. So you have prolongation of your QT interval. It could be any of those kinds of things. Okay. These are considered to be very serious toxicities, and so they will limit the dose that you can give to the patients. Okay, so that's called the dose limiting toxicity. So now supposing you add 3 patients at 10 mg. Okay, out of those 3 patients, none of them have a dose limiting toxicity. Okay, so then what would you do? You go to the next higher dose level. Okay, which could be 15 mg. Yeah, is that clear? So it's easy. Okay, so you can proceed ahead, hence it is in green. Okay. Now, supposing out of those 3 patients, you get one of them, of those 3 patients, has this dose limiting toxicity. So what would you do? You actually add 3 more patients at the same dose level, so at 10 mg. Okay. Out of the new 3 patients, let's say 0 have dose limiting toxicity. Okay. So now how many patients do you have at 10 mg? 6. 3 from before and 3 new. 3 plus 3. Okay. Out of the 6, if one of them, okay, so if none of the new 3 and only one of the old 3 have it, then it is 1 out of 6, correct? So your dose limiting toxicity is 1 out of 6. If this is the case, then you can go ahead, again you're in green, and you can go to the next higher dose level, which is 15 mg. Okay. But what happens if out of the remaining 3 also, the new 3 that you add, another one or more also has a DLT? Okay. So now your DLT is more than 1 out of 6. So it's either 2 out of 6 or 3 out of 6 and so on. Yeah. In that case, you're red. So you have to stop. Now you're saying that my DLT is too high. Okay. There are too many people having adverse events. So stop and go to the lower dose level. So from 10, go back to 5. Okay. Or if you have already tested 6 patients in 5, then you stop and you say that 5 is the maximum tolerated dose. You can't go to 10 at all. Okay. This is what you do if you get 1 out of 3 in the first set of 3. Okay. Now what happens if you, in the first 3 only you get more than 1 out of 3, like 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3. Then you stop there only. You don't add 3 more patients. You stop right there and you say either go to a lower dose or you declare the lower dose itself as what they call the maximum tolerated dose, MTD. Does that make sense? 3+3 design? Yeah, anybody has any questions on this? All right, so everybody is okay with this 3+3 design, right? Now this 3+3 design is good, all right? It has been used a lot. In fact, for one of the studies at CMC, we were looking at, instead of a 3+3, we were looking at a 10+10. So it can be 3+3, 4+4, 5+5, anything, right? Why do you think that it came up with 3+3 initially? And the reason for that is because that traditionally in some of these, very hard diseases like oncology, where people are dying, people were willing to accept a toxicity level of 30%. Okay. Which meant that out of every 3 patients who are dosed, if one of them has a very bad, severe adverse event, they were willing to accept that. Okay. And this 3+3 design, the operating characteristics of this design allow you to have a DLT rate of roughly 33%, okay, or 35%. And that's the reason why the 3+3 was a very, very famous popular design that was used. Okay. But there is a problem with the 3+3. Okay. And what's the problem? Is that this is the problem. Okay. Which is that, let us say that you have, you start with dose level 1, 0 out of 3, dose level 2, 0 out of 3, dose level 3, you go 1 out of 3. Okay. And 0 out of 3. Okay. So you go to dose level 4, 0 out of 3, go to dose level 5. Okay, you get the first 3, you get 1 out of 3, second 3, you get 1 out of 3. Okay, so you go back now, which is in dose level 4, you get 1 out of 3. Okay, the minute this happens, you can never go up again. Okay, now dose level 4 has become your maximum tolerated dose, even though there has only been 1 DLT out of 6. Okay. Here there was 1 DLT out of 6, you went up to dose level 4. Here again there is 1 DLT out of 6, but you can't go up anymore. Okay, that now becomes a problem. Okay, so this is one limitation. Okay, what is the other limitation? Is this, okay, consider the blue line is the probability of having either 0 or 1 DLT in 6. Okay. Now, supposing your true DLT rate was 0.5, okay, which is right here. This is your true DLT rate. Okay. The chance of seeing either 0 or 1 DLT is still 11%. Okay. So, which means more than 10% of the time, even if your true DLT rate is 0.5, okay, your true DLT rate, you want it to be at least close to 0.3, right? But even if your true DLT rate is 0.5, 11% of the time, you will think that the drug is acceptable when actually it is not. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay, which is a problem. Okay. And now let's look at the red line. Okay. Let us say that your true DLT rate is only 0.166. So it's right here. 0.166, 1 in 6. This is your true DLT rate. But 26% of the time, you will see at least 2 in 6 DLT patients. So which means you will not escalate anymore. So even if your true DLT rate is so low, 0.166, 26% of the time, you will actually stop and say, because you're seeing 2 and 6 DLTs. Okay, so you'll actually stop and say that you can't proceed any higher. So you end up with doses that are not very efficacious. Okay, you end up with very low doses. All right. So because of these two reasons, okay, what we have now started to do is to say that the 3+3 design, while it served its purpose, is not really the best approach. Yeah. So how can I make this better? I can make this better by using more adaptive designs, a model-based approach. Okay. So what is my model-based approach is, my methodology is that I'm going to use a logistic regression. So it's called a BLRM, Bayesian Logistic Regression Model. Okay, anything else? No, all right. Okay. Yeah, and we have priors. So we say that I will start with some initial prior information about how the DLT curve looks. Okay, then I will dose patients and get that information. And then based on that information, I will go back and update my prior. Okay, and I'll keep on doing this till my model becomes stable. Okay. So this is, for example, a simple, very simple model. It's just called a 2-parameter model. Okay. Logit of pi is log of pi over 1 minus pi. Okay, which is the regular thing that you know how to do this. Just log of alpha plus beta log of di over d star, where those are the reference doses. Di is the actual dose level that you're trying to look at. Yeah. And this has only 2 parameters, alpha and beta, right? But you can actually extend this to many more parameters. I mean, we sometimes run 16 parameter logistic models. Okay, and then you have the regular priors and so on. Okay, so based on this, we assume, let's say, a non-informative prior. Okay, a median of 0.1, but otherwise it's non-informative. So this is a non-informative prior that, let's say, we use. Okay, and now we get some data, which is out of 6 patients, we have 1 DLT. Okay. So now this is my posterior probability. This was my non-informative prior. This is based on my posterior after seeing 1 out of 6 DLTs. Okay. Now, once I get this, I start to get a lot more information, which is that the chance and the gray area is called underdosing. Okay. What is the underdosing? Means the targeted toxicity is less than 1 in 6, 0.167. Okay, is less than 1 in 6. So the probability for this particular dose level, the probability for being in the underdosing area is 48.3. Okay, the green area is my target toxicity, which is 16% to 33%. Okay, so I'm looking at 1 in 6 to 1 in 3 people that have DLTs. That is my target toxicity. For this target toxicity, the probability of being in this zone is 35%. And for overdosing, which is toxicity greater than 33%, the probability for being in the red zone is 17%. Okay, makes sense? 48% in probability for underdosing, 35% probability for targeted toxicity, and 17% for overdosing. So if you had this information, what would you do? Would you say that I should stick to this dose level, or would you say that I can go to the next dose level? Anybody have an opinion? If your targeted toxicity is 35%, probability for underdosing is 48%, probability of overdosing is 17%, would you like to stop here or go to the next? What would be your recommendation be? Would you stop or go to the next dose level? So now we do the same thing. Okay. So let us say that now this is the actual experiment that has happened. Okay. So in the first dose level 1, 3 patients, 0 DLTs. Dose level 2.5, 4 patients, 0 DLTs. Dose level 5, 5 patients, 0 DLTs. Dose level 10, 4 patients, 0 DLTs. Okay. So based on all of this, the model suggested that we should go to dose number 25. So we went to dose number 25, you put 2 patients on it and both of them had DLTs. Okay. So now what happens is you want to try and figure out what should you do? What should be the next dose level? Should you keep it at 25? Should you increase it to 30? Should you decrease it to 20 or 15? Yeah. And that's where we come up with graphs like this. Okay. This top graph is a probability of overdosing. Okay. So this is the data we have right now. Okay. So already we see we want to make sure that the probability of overdosing is not greater than 25%. Okay. All right. Already you can see that from dose level 20 onwards, the probability of overdosing increases by more than 25%. Okay. So dose level 10 and 15 is okay in terms of overdosing. Okay. Now look at targeted toxicity. Okay. This is target dosing. In target dosing, you find that the highest probability is for dose level 15, followed by dose level 20. Okay. So which are your two candidate doses now? 15 and 20. Okay. Here 15 is below the overdosing threshold. Okay. Here 15 has a highest target dosing probability. And if you look at probability of underdosing, here again 15 is higher than 20. Okay. So the chance of underdosing with 15 is higher. So in this case, the chance of underdosing with 15 is higher. The chance of overdosing with 20 is higher than 25. So based on this information, what would your recommended dose be? Would it be 15? Would it be 20? Would it be 10? Would it be 25, 30? Okay. So between 15 and 20, both seem reasonable. But if it were my thing, I would recommend 15. And the reason for that is because 20 is crossing the threshold for overdosing. I don't want, to have the probability of overdosing to be more than 25%. So because of that, I would say that I would like to have my next recommended dose as 15. Yeah, Raji had raised her hand. Raji had a question. No? Okay. All right. Is everybody okay with this? Do you see how we can use adaptive designs here? Yeah. So we are looking at incoming data from previous dose levels, and we are using that to update our model, our prior model. Yeah. And then looking at the posterior model and then figuring out exactly what should be the recommendation for the next dose level. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So that's a little bit about, as I said, we'll just briefly touch upon how we can use adaptive designs in the exploratory state.